I think teachers and parents as well, and maybe many other people in the culture, assume that the differences we see between individual children are fundamentally genetic differences or inherent differences. If you look at kids when they're newborns, you find very few differences between them. As they grow older, the differences magnify. I would argue that those differences are differences in their environment, because as I mentioned earlier, the environment is all of the stimuli that affect behavior at a given moment. And no two individuals can have the same environment. So you have different rates of behavioral development because there are different environments that impact different kids. So the first tool that behavior analysts can offer educators is a philosophy about kids and about learning. And the first part of that philosophy is that all kids are potentially capable of learning anything we throw at them. They're all capable of mastering everything. Now you understand why that philosophy is not held by most people, because that doesn't happen in schools. Not all kids master what we want them to learn. So is it easier to throw the blame or the responsibility onto the kid or onto the educational system? Well, in our culture, it's much easier to throw the responsibility to the kid. If a kid doesn't learn something, it's not my fault as a teacher or an educator or a principal or a school superintendent. It's the child's responsibility. There's something with the child. The child is incapable of doing that. So a behavior analytic approach first offers a philosophy that all kids are equal in what they can learn. Secondly, behavior analysts then offers the tools with which teachers can more effectively teach kids. And I think I need to talk about the word teach, because frequently people say, I'm a teacher, or, what I'm going to teach today. And they make those claims without looking whether the kids are actually learning. So if the kids aren't learning, then you're not teaching. So I think that people need to reevaluate what the word teaching means. The tools that behavior analysts can offer teachers, in addition to the philosophy, are specific methods by which to allow children to achieve that mastery. B.F. Skinner mentioned 4 general guidelines that I think are really important to remember. The first one is, be clear about what is to be taught. So for example, if you ask a math teacher, what do you want your kids to learn? And they say math, well, that's not very clear. There are a lot of things that comprise what math is. So by being clear what is to be taught, you have to specify the exact behavior and the exact environmental circumstance that you want. Just to give you an extremely simplistic example, if you want to teach a child to say 4 to the question 2 plus 2, well, 2 plus 2 is the stimulus. That's what we would call a discriminative stimulus. And we want a correct answer to that stimulus. Now, if a child can do that, we don't necessarily say the child knows math, but the more the child can do things like that, the more we might say the child can do math. The second guideline that Skinner suggests is to teach first things first. And this is often a mistake that educators make. First, we need to start where the kids are at. You can't assume that all kids have mastered the same level of material. So you have to start where an individual kid is at. And then you have to teach first things first. Everything that we teach in school, whether it's arithmetic or reading or spelling or writing or science, there's always a first step. There's a first thing that kids need to learn. So after we've been clear about what we want to teach them, then we have to specify exactly what the steps are, okay? Now, once those 2 guidelines have been met, the third one, which perhaps is the most important one, is that we need to stop making all kids progress at the same rate. And Skinner has suggested that this one change alone could revolutionize American education. Because we all know that when kids go to first grade or third grade or whatever, you have a group of 30 or 40 kids, and the teacher tries to teach all of them, and they're all supposed to move at the same rate. And we all know the reality. The reality is they don't all move at the same rate. Some move much more quickly, and sometimes we give them names like gifted, and some move much more slowly, and we also have names for them, which are not generally too flattering. And then there's some in the middle who all move around the same rate. So if we could stop making children all progress at the same rate, that would revolutionize American education. It presents logistical problems because right now we have an overcrowded educational system. So we have one teacher for 30 or 40 kids, which is definitely not an ideal learning environment for anybody. If you stop making all kids move at the same rate and you allow them to progress at their own rate while still making sure they master the material, then you have to reorganize and restructure the educational setting, because one teacher can't do that. Now there's a method called direct instruction, which is basically scripted learning, and the teacher reads a script. And so in that sense, you don't really need a qualified credentialed teacher to do that, because anybody can read the script and teach the kids. Teachers have a problem with that because they go to school and they're credentialed as teachers, and they don't like the notion, they feel threatened by the notion that somebody else could come in and just read a script and have that teach the kid. But the point is that if you allow kids to move at their own rate, you have to restructure the classroom so that kids can do that. And there are a number of different ways you can do that. Just in considering that, the other tools that behavior analysts can offer, and this is the fourth guideline that Skinner suggests, and that is program the material. And what that means is you break down complex subjects into stepwise components. Because let's face it, any complex intellectual task that you want to learn, whether it's algebra or critical thinking or spelling or writing, it's composed of smaller components or constituents. So if you break down the complex behavior into its smaller component parts and then teach those individually and make sure reinforcement is contingent on each of those, then you have programmed the material and you're more likely for the child to have mastered the content that you want them to master. And so just to summarize, in the educational system the way we have it now, not all children master the material, and yet we pass them through grade after grade. An educational system that is designed by a behavior analyst would make sure that all children master the material, but that they do it at different rates. And it's okay. If somebody does it faster, that's fine. If somebody does it slower, that's fine. But they all learn the same material, and then they're able to move on to the next phase.